So tonight, we have Shanti Pierce, who's going to be sharing with us, and I think we're super fortunate to be able to have Shanti and so many other strong permaculture and regenerative voices in our community. You know, last month, or the last gathering we had 103 people that were sitting in this room just wanting to learn about agriculture, wanting to learn about food forests and gardening, and not only how do we do it differently, but how do we do it better? You know, how do we really up our game and leave a place better than what we found it, leave a planet better than the way that we found it? So one of the things that I think is very unique with Shanti is she is very passionate about one of the most absolutely beneficial and also the most controversial plants on the planet. And it is absolutely useful. We use it here on the farm. We're starting to do a lot of bamboos, you know, for our cattle. It's medicinal. She'll get into all of these wonderful uses. And if you enjoyed the unglaze that was on the meatballs, that actually had bamboo to help with the silica extraction and the bones and the marrow. So you got to enjoy a little bit of bamboo in that process. So Shanti has a beautifully extensive background that weaves in and out of plants and agriculture and business, the animal kingdom at Disney. So you name it, she has been there and been involved and been connected. And I would be willing to say, and I listen to a lot of teachers, she is one of the top 3 bamboo experts that I have ever heard in my life. There's just a real wealth of knowledge that we are very fortunate to be able to learn from and grow from. So tonight we have Shanti Pierce.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And I'm actually really excited about this topic because it's not in the same way of what you probably thought you were coming to hear. Is anybody new here? Anybody here for the first time? Welcome. Thank you so much. If you didn't get a piece of bamboo, we're going to be using that bamboo later, so just hold on to it while you're here. They're right over there in the red bin. Just grab a piece. And we just want to say that, as a plant person, plant and animal people, we tend to be a little bit of recluses. And I think I want to say this in a positive way, that we are working, we have not perfected, we are always on this journey, but we are working at our coping mechanisms on how we deal with that, right? This is what we do. And as plant people, or animal people, I'm both, we know that we get a lot of therapy from working in those realms. And so for me, I wanted to touch on that because I think everybody here in the room can understand that concept, but I think people out here maybe don't understand that concept. And so I wanted you guys to really get informed so that you can be advocates in moving out into this world. Because we here are lucky enough and fortunate enough and privileged enough that we have access to spaces, and we also make it a priority in our life. But there's a lot of people out there who are struggling with how to deal with these coping mechanisms, and we're really going to see this moving forward. I mean, I know that I'm not the only person who's seeing people walk around with VR goggles and stuff like this, and it's even far worse than people walking around like this, right? So as we move into this realm of having different worldviews of like, my personal worldview is that as a human being, I am here to steward the land that I work with and to work in conjunction with the land and the animals to help bring all of that together, as opposed to the worldview that maybe it would be better if I wasn't here, right? And so we all have our own perspective on that, but I really think that this lack of connection, the lack of connection that we're feeling in the world, and I would say here we are feeling connected, right? We come here to get our connection. We also know how to get our connection from plants and animals that we spend time with. And so for you to go out and to give that message to other people, for them to be able to get that connection. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of that and also some skill sets and how to utilize plants to be able to do that so that you have some skill sets to be able to move forward. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about, this is at my farm, is that we just want to start a minute with thinking about what bamboo even is. And my friend Arif, he does reforesting deforested areas and rehabilitating lands in these just amazingly magical ways. And he has this way of talking about bamboo and yoga, where you start at the roots. And the roots of the bamboo are rhizomes. These are rhizomes that are in the shallow surfaces. And through the rhizomes, you come up, and this plant comes up like a tree, but it is a tube. And within those tubes, there are many, many, many tubes that make up that tube. And that tube wants to go up, and it wants to spread out, but when it gets to the node, that node is solid, and it keeps it together. But then it wants to go out, but the node keeps it together. And as this bamboo grows up, it's reaching for the sunlight. And that sunlight is where it wants to go, because once it gets to the top, it will create these solar panels that are leaves. And from those solar panels, it can create energy from sunlight. That's an amazing thing. It can create energy from sunlight and water. And so that energy will then come back down through the bamboo and down all the way back into the root systems. And into that root system, it shares all these resources, not only with the funguses and the bacteria that it partners with in the soil, but all of the soil the ecosystem of the soil, and then the plants that surround it. And so within that realm, bamboos are, that's how I like to say it, because a lot of people think there's only one bamboo. There's a lot of bamboos. There's actually almost close to 2,000 bamboos, by the way. Within that realm, bamboos are sharing in the community, much like we are sharing in the community. And so I think that it's really apt to talk about this sharing and community and therapy within the plant realm in conjunction with bamboos. Whoops. There we go. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of gardens. And I'm just going to preface this by starting by saying that we're starting at one point and we're going to move to somewhere else. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history of the use of therapy in gardens and get to know a little bit about how important therapeutic gardens are. And this really starts all the way back to 3000 BC, and that's just of what we have historical records of, right? We can go all the way back to ancient Egypt. Within these gardens, and what I want to lay out within this talk is to give you some parameters that you might not think about, because I think when we talk about permaculture and agroforestry and farms and all this stuff, we think about all these things that are for people that can access that because of mobility and the way that they can get through things. And I think one of the things that maybe we need to start thinking about is how can we make this not just for our small little community of our 2% of the people that we're talking to, but for the rest of the 98%. And that's what I really want to focus on, is like, let's think about how we can make these spaces accessible for more people. And so in ancient Egypt, going back to 3,000 years, gardens, regardless of whether you look at Egypt or you look at like India or China, and there are always these enclosed spaces. And the reason we like to have enclosed spaces is because they feel safe. And the idea is we're creating a garden that is away and separate from the chaos of what's going on outside. I don't think the concept of what was going on in 3000 BC is any different than what's going on now, right? We're still talking about the same thing. These are human elements. And what's amazing to me as we go back through history is like, we are still talking about the same things, right? None of this is new. This is a human experience that we have, that people have had for thousands and thousands of years. And so one of the things is these gardens had water. These gardens had medicinal plants. These gardens had flowers, and they had a wall. And so this concept was you spend time in the garden. And the priests, who were also the physicians in this time frame, it's all together. It's mind, body, and spirit. Does any of this start to sound familiar right now? Right? Mind, body, and spirit are all coming together in the garden. And so this is dating back all the way to there. And so, I mean, this, like in some of these examples, some of the pharaohs would have waterways that could have boats that had like 20 oarsmen that they have documented. So, I mean, the gardens got a little extensive at some points, you know. But I think it's really interesting to think about how far back this mind, body, and spirit really goes, because it is who we are. And so these are just more examples of how they would use gardens. Again, they're within a wall. They have trees, they have shrubs, they have medicinal plants, they have flowers. So there's an element of beauty, there's an element of medicine, there's an element of space, there's an element of calm. And the priests, physicians would actually prescribe to people to go spend time in the garden. So this is even this far back. And then we have some examples. I love this. This is Pompeii. This was a garden reconstructed as to like basically a subdivision in Pompeii, 79 AD, right? So, and these are some of the plants they would use. I like this a lot because it talks about what they're actually using in the space. So they have sycamore, figs, date, and these plants are not only like, they are representative of different aspects of people's lives. So you can see already that people are using these plants not only for the medicinal aspect, but they also represent things in their life like rebirth or death and the cycle of life and things like that. So plants and trees and all of this came together. Asclepius he's the son of Apollo and is really well known as being, basically these were the first physical spaces that were used for medicinal aspects. So the temples were healing centers, and they were always located basically kind of like high up on mountains where they had an incredible view with a mineral spring and like fresh air coming in, because these are what they believed were important for healing. And so people came to these temples, and they started to spread all over ancient Greece and into the Roman period too, as they started to spread around because these were the healing centers of the time. And it was the first time that they actually had a space that was designated for healing. Hippocrates actually trained at the Asclepius temples. So Hippocrates is the father of medicine, and this is where it all came from. And so they started to use these spaces for all sorts of things. Spring waters for ritual cleansing, dream healing, utilizing herbs, essential oils, treating wounds with like organic materials like honey and onions. So all of these things were being utilized in these temple spaces. I like this picture because it has bamboo in it. And what I like about this picture a lot, so this is from about 500 BCE, is that the bamboos here that are pictured in this carving are like the mother bamboos. They're very putting everybody within this little dome of protection. And to me, that's always what bamboos are, is they create these spaces of protection. And when we talk about gardens for healing and for feeling safe, safety is a huge part of that. To feel safe, to be able to go through and think and be, and to work through things that are bothering you at the time. And that safety is a huge part of that. So the first hospitals were in the 4th century, and these were actual hospitals that came out of the Byzantine Empire. And so like in ancient Egypt and the Roman and the ancient Greece civilizations, these are all still based around religion. So religion and healing are together, and this continues forward. As the empire travels, these places start to spread across the empire, and they're basically like very basic spaces. But they also included having light. That was very important to them. And so then we move into the Middle Ages. And again, we're going through like this history pretty quickly, but I really wanted to highlight is like how some of these elements continue through and how we're utilizing them today. So the monasteries became very prevalent in the Middle Ages, and they were used as healing centers too. So the Catholic Church and the Christian religion really took on the role of being healers for mind, body, and soul, and this was all housed within the monasteries. And the monasteries had these enclosed spaces. Again, we come across these enclosed spaces where they grew medicinal herbs that they used. And this woman, Hildegard, of Bingen. She was amazing. So she really, a lot of people attribute her to being kind of the beginning of the science part of being a doctor and medicine, and then she was actually known as a doctor. She wrote books about it. She wrote books about medicinal plants, how to use them. She was a lot of different things. She has a lot of music that she sang and used. So she was a big part of spreading this idea throughout all the different monasteries. And this is her book. She wrote a book on medicinal plants from the holistic perspective. And she really believed in the holistic treatment of people. So she believed in using natural elements to heal all sorts of things, from what was, anything from mental illness to physical illness. We're going to fast forward a little bit to Dr. Benjamin Rush in the 19th century. Not only did he sign the Declaration of Independence, but he's also the father of American psychiatry. And he also believed that mental illness was best treated through working gardens. And so we start to see that two different things are happening at this time, especially around people with mental illness. There was the lock them up and throw away the key method, and then there was the method of having them out and being in the garden and working spaces. Florence Nightingale was a big proponent of using outdoor spaces and incorporating sunlight, fresh air, and being in nature as part of healing. And then Rudolf Steiner. So Rudolf Steiner is the father of Waldorf schools. He also is really well known for the biodynamic farming. This is kind of beyond organic farming, where you utilize, there's hundreds of different remedies that you use for building soil. One of which is silica, by the way. Bamboos are very, very high in silica. So he was in Europe. Europe is one of the few places that bamboos are not native to. They are actually native to the United States. And I believe it's 806 is the one that addresses silica. And silica is used, this is just a tangent that I'm going to go on. Silica is used to help strengthen baby plants. It's an antifungal. It builds up the cell wall. It helps the immune system of the plants. And so he was using it in the springtime to spray on the plants. He was using actually horsetail, but bamboo has 10 times the silica of horsetail. And he was using it to strengthen those plants and get them ready to be more resilient in their growth. He was also a big proponent. He thought about a lot of different things. And so, of course, one of the things he thought about is what is healing and where are the spaces that you heal in. And so he was a big proponent of, again, light, space, air, natural components. Okay, and then we're going to move through a few more like history stuff. So the 14th, 15th century, we start to move out of the monasteries and into actual hospitals. Now, the hospitals were designed to look a lot like monasteries, with a view of a priest or a religious person from almost all, like the hallways all led to that kind of view. In the late 1700s, we have the beginning of Romanticism. This is a nature-centric view of the world. So these really influence like all the different things that are happening, while as to like what's going on in art and architecture and nature. And so this influenced hospitals as well. So they had elaborate gardens and really spread out, and people went for long walks and things like that. In 1792, the Society of Friends in England pioneered this idea that mentally ill people needed to be in working situations and in nature, and to be a practice of treating the mentally ill patients in a much more holistic way instead of what was happening. And then this spread to the United States. And so the one in the United States that opened after that was in Philadelphia. And it was quite a move away from what was happening with mentally ill people up until that point. And then we get to the late 1800s, and something dramatically happened, which is Louis Pasteur discovered bacteria. And so that puts us on a whole path of going down into hygiene and antiseptics and starting to separate ourselves from nature. I mean, there's a lot of positive that comes from this, but it also you start to see hospitals, they're shrinking their gardens. The gardens are not so incorporated with the in and out of everything. The hospitals become very much segregated within themselves, and they start to go up and be enclosed, and the gardens start to go away. And that happens between about the 1860s and really all the way through until the 1950s, when it's kind of peaking with industrialization and the movement towards hospitals being these kind of concrete enclosures with maybe some windows. Some of the hospitals, even at the time, only had windows like where you didn't see out of. They were just light that came in. And so that really starts to take away, where you have healing and you have outdoors, and they start to be very separated and segregated. In the 1920s and 50s, we have that decline of hospitals. At the same time, we start to have what I would call almost like a pharmaceutical approach to nature. And so in World War I, we have the beginning of occupational and physical therapy. This is the first time that those things have actually been named and start to have actual healing modalities. And then by World War II, we actually have something called horticulture therapy. I do think it's interesting to think about. I don't really have a strong opinion at the moment, but it's interesting to think about how we go through this idea of separation of the two, and then we bring it back in as a prescription. And I would say where we're at now is probably further down that line, and that's what we're looking at. I'm not going to say right, wrong, or anything, but I think it's an interesting observation to think about how we look at that. We start to have, in 1978, there was a woman who went into a hospital. She was very sick. She was treated, and she came out of the hospital. But her experience in the hospital, she felt, was awful. Just the whole, she said everybody is looking at it and asking the doctors and the nurses what they need, but nobody's asking the patients how they feel about being in the hospital. And it's terrible. So she started this nonprofit called Plain Tree, and she basically went around asking patients, what are things that we could do different? How could you, do this? And so she ended up starting a center that was all centered around creating a healing environment based off of that feedback. And even now till today, they help to consult with hospitals and different healing spaces. How can we do better for the patient? How can we make this feel more like home? As the hospitals started to go and become more like high-rises, the interesting thing is that nursing home and hospices still were the only two that remained, had the vision or the mission to actually keep feeling like it was somewhere, home away from home, basically. Home away from home, and still had gardens, but the hospitals had gotten rid of those. In the 1990s, and there's other organizations, these are just two that I picked out. Eden Alternate, their byline is well-being is a human right, we teach it, you empower it. So they provide an approach to care that supports the whole person and that upholds the right of life, of purpose, connection, empowerment, and possibility, regardless of age and changing abilities. And so this is where we're at now, is we are at this moment of recognition that where we were in 3000 BC, we need to bring some of that back in a way that puts those things together. And I think that's very much true for medicinal herbs, nutraceuticals, things like that. We're talking about how do we incorporate these things together? How do we bring tech in with the non-tech, and how do we put these together, and how do we make it better? The most famous study that gets cited a lot was done by Dr. Roger Ehrlich. And what he did was he took patients in a hospital, there were a variety of ages, and they were having gallbladder surgeries. And so some of them had a window that they could see trees out of, and some of them didn't. And basically, the study was the first one that really definitively showed that when you give people even just a view of nature, that it reduces the amount of pain medication they need, it improves their overall well-being, they have less complaints to the nurses, which is a big one, and they get released earlier. I mean, all these things are happening just because they can see out the window. After that, there was Blue Cross and Blue Shield of California had a program in the 90s where they gave out CDs. They determined that the CDs, they were kind of like mindful meditation on them and just visualization and things like that. The CDs cost them $17 to give to the patients. On average, they showed that they saved over $2,000 per patient by giving them those CDs. So there's real money in doing this. And the pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals, all of these places are starting to recognize that there is big savings in doing this kind of work. And these are a few more studies. Most of the studies are showing, like in here, talking about students and showing that the attention span is increased, and then experiments that show that the environment, being in environments and being outside can help with cognitive flexibility and memory. People who listen to nature sounds like crickets chirping and waves crashing performed better and demanding cognitive tests than those that listen to urban sounds. And so basically, we know that nature sounds, being in nature, and also the diversity of nature. There's another study here that shows that when you have more diversity in nature, there is overall well-being. So all of these things are super important for ADHD, for dementia, for all sorts of different cognitive issues that people are having, not to mention anxiety, depression, and any sort of mental health illness. And so when we start to look at these spaces, is that how can we utilize these spaces to really help us address what we're having right now with a mental health crisis? Right now in colleges, the number that they're quoting, which I think is probably way under, is that 50% is what's being told to the colleges. 50% of their students have a diagnosed mental illness. And now we're seeing kids that are 5 and 8 years, there's a percentage of kids under the age of 10, which I think is like almost at 10% now that are having mental illness, under the age of 10. So we have a huge problem, and it's something that we need to address. So what we're gonna go into here is like some of the ways that you can incorporate, or that other people are incorporating, these kind of therapies to be able to share with other people who don't have access or don't know how to access. One of the things that I think is probably pretty obvious for most of the people here is that we feel safe being in nature. And that is within a realm, right? We have, if you were to go, one of the things that a lot of people do in ecotherapy is they have a sit space, and that sit space becomes their safe space. And that is something that you can actually physically go to, but it's also a space that you can take with you, and when you're having a moment, or like say you're getting an MRI, or say you're in a car accident, or say you're somewhere and you have a stressful situation happen, you can go to that place in your mind, and that will automatically lower your heart rate. And so these spaces that we have to be able to learn how to utilize them and to keep them with us is really important. Forest bathing. So what I like about forest bathing is that this one took place, really started in Japan, and Japan has a lot of bamboo. So a lot of the studies have to do with bamboo. And forest bathing is about really just spending time in a natural space. And like I said, not everybody feels safe in a natural space. So this may not be applicable to a lot of people. Because I know that you guys may have experienced this, but I have people come to my farm all the time that it feels very unsafe to them, and they're looking around, and I'm not quite sure, and so usually the conversation I have is, what exactly are you afraid of? Because oftentimes we do a generalized thing where like everything is scary, but once you start naming things, then you can start to get to like and answer those questions. So like on my farm, people will say like, well, there might be an animal. Okay, so what type of animal might that be that could actually hurt you? Because mostly what I see is like armadillos and possums. So they're not really coming after you. But these are very real to people. And the other thing is to consider is like, if you went to your safe space, but it was the middle of the night and it was a new moon, so it's totally dark, would you still feel safe there? Right? And so that's a good example of like being able to understand how other people feel in places that we feel safe. Now, for some people, they feel very safe in downtown New York City. That is not a place that I particularly feel safe. So I might need that same thing in that situation. Horticulture therapy. Again, like I said, this came out of World War II. This is actually using, it's what See the Stars does, right? Horticulture therapy. And it's used for a lot of different aspects. So you can use it for, say, for instance, for manipulation and for flexibility of hands, building muscles in the hands. So you can use it for actually like an occupational type of therapy. You can use it for a mental type of therapy. It's used a lot for people who have access issues, so disabilities that don't allow them. You can even do that if you're sightless. You can definitely do that if you have disabilities around hearing or in a wheelchair, mobility issues and things like that. So we start to get to places where we can access things for all people so that we make it social equalizing. Ecotherapy is a big one. A lot of times it's called green therapy. This can be anything from therapists who do their work outside with somebody and incorporate nature as basically like a co-therapist. And this can be something that is like a 4-year degree or a master's degree. It can also be something, there are now becoming schools where you can get trained as an ecotherapist. And I really think that this question of like, I have this piece of land, or this is what I want to do, and I like to grow plants, like how can I make a living from it? A lot of it, I think, can be thought of along these lines, because this is a growing industry and a growing service that is really, really needed. And there's a lot of people in this room and in our community who would be really good at this. And there's a lot of need out there towards this. So the other thing is like saying it in a way that people outside of this room can hear. And so that's why all of the voices are important, because who I can speak to isn't going to be the same person as who you can speak to. And so having a diversity of voices and a diversity of styles is really important to be able to help all the people. So green therapies again, and they incorporate all these different things. We have adventure therapy, animal-assisted therapy, dark nature. This is a really interesting one to think about, is like doing activities in the dark and how that pushes your boundary on your fear level. Because even for somebody, I know I have a place that I work at. It's 900 acres, and it has an 8,000 square foot house on it. And so I'm fine working there during the day on 900 acres. I'm even actually fine being out at night on the 900 acres. But the 8,000 square foot house is terrifying to me at night. So, but pushing the boundaries of like where your safe zone is and where it's not can also be a form of therapy. I mean, being very comfortable in your space and who you are all the time is not a growth pattern, right? We need to push ourselves in some ways. And this is why, like, There's a school that I work at, Creation Village. I just have to say that I love that school so much. They do so many amazing things. I was there working, planting some bamboos, and it was in the evening, and it was pouring down rain, and those kids were out there playing soccer. I was like, yes, absolutely, because this whole idea of like, oh, well, it's too rainy, or it's too cold, or it's too this, or it's too that, like, we need to be stronger human beings, not weaker human beings, not like, is it 72, where's my AC set to, like, it's important to push our boundaries. So we have green exercise is another one, actually doing physical exercise outside. I don't have to tell you how hard it is to work in the garden, right? I don't go to the gym, we just go to the garden. That's enough for me. Wilderness therapy, that's another one of pushing boundaries and really learning how to interface with nature. I don't think that in this day and age, that is something that you should assume is innately within our DNA. I really think that it's okay to know that these are trained skill sets that you can go out and learn from somebody, and then you know how to do it, right? This was something when I lived in Costa Rica. I had been in the ocean off and on my whole life. I never lived at the ocean, but I was never taught how to navigate the ocean. And so learning from the surfers, like how to actually get back out of the water when there's huge waves, and how do you how do you navigate that around rocks and things like that, that's a skill set. And so these are things, I don't think that anybody should feel guilty for not actually just knowing this stuff. These are things that we can learn. Farming therapy. There it is. So farming therapy is a big one. It's what Chris is doing here. It's making it accessible to people, and people learn. When I lived in Minnesota, I was in my 21. It's a long time ago. And I gardened on my front lawn, which was basically a big slope that I terraced. And there was a Section 8 housing down the street, and the kids would come up, and they're like, "What are you doing? Why are you eating that? Yuck, that looks gross." I said, "It's a tomato." They're like, "A tomato? Tomatoes are in the store." I said, "No, tomatoes are right here on the..." This is a long time ago. It's even farther down that spectrum now with kids and knowing where their food comes from and how to grow it and how... I mean, these are basic things like, they can operate an iPhone and probably, do all sorts of things like that, but they don't know how to grow a plant. They don't know how to survive without having a grocery store. So farm therapy for kids, for adults, for lots of things. Again, we're talking about all the things that can come into this package, whether it's somebody who is a mental health or physical health. These are all coming into the same realms and can be addressed. So design considerations. My 5 places that I would really like to see always have a therapy garden: hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, schools, and churches. I think that should just be a basic no-brainer. There should be access to those places. Those are public spaces where people who can access them all the time, and they're needed. And we've already seen that there's plenty of studies that show that kids who are around nature have way more capability of learning and have more focus. So why not have gardens in schools, nursing homes, all of these places? I mean, it's just a no-brainer. So accessibility and safety, we talked a little bit about this. It's important when we're talking about bringing in people who are maybe not used to working in the garden, is to think about how they're going to access it. If they're in a wheelchair, if they have a walker, if they have maybe a foot that doesn't lift as high. So trip hazards are really, really important when we're talking about these kind of issues. Thorns, sharp edges, keeping plants out. Like if you're gonna put roses in, they would go just one tier back. So you can have plants like these. And it's just important to have these considerations when doing design work around it. Lighting. So an example is cancer patients and burn patients both need a lot of shade because light can be, their eyes can be very, with cancer patients from the chemotherapy, light can be very sensitive. Glare from a sidewalk can be very sensitive. So sidewalks, while they're easy to navigate for a lot of people, tinting and coloring the sidewalk concrete is an easy example of how to simply change the design. And then nighttime use, what kind of lighting are you going to put up for that? You can put artistic lighting, you can put lighting that highlights certain areas. Always within gardens, we want to have places that people have pause. The whole thing about a garden, and to begin with, is you want to change the time. So just like when you're making a movie or things like that, you can change the time to go slower. This is what a garden does. Plants and people do not operate at the same time frame. And so the whole thing about connecting with plants is about connecting back to a time frame that isn't so anxiety driven and isn't so fast paced. And that's what we talk about here. Creating stopping points, wonder walks. I love that term. I think that's a beautiful term. I think everybody could utilize that. Wonder walks, because the thing is that we want to go back. I recently spent time with a whole day with a 3-year-old. It was magical. It was such a great reminder. My kids are so old, you know. It's such a great reminder. I think everybody should spend a day with a 3-year-old, because she's like, I love plants. I said, me too. She's like, I like flowers and animals too. I was like, me too. I was like, these are perfect conversations for me. You know, I can do this. So that's what we did. We did bubbles and plants and animals. We rolled around in the grass. And she was excited about everything that we did. And it was amazing. It's like, you know, I think we get so far down this trail of this journey in human existence, and we forget how wonderful and amazing everything is. And to be able to stop and see, you know, just how magical spaces are. And sometimes, like, I know I have a tendency to move through things too quickly. And we get those moments, and to create moments within the space that where people are interacting that are awe moments, that are wonder moments. I mean, it's the kind of thing when you're doing farm therapy where people are like, oh my God, look what I grew. This is so exciting. Look at this. And like kids and adults feel that. Like, I grew this, right? These are wonder things. Sensory, touch, toxicity, smell, sight. Most of the time in garden design, we want to keep toxic plants out, although I have a little bit of, I have a little issue around that, because I feel like, you know, don't put everything in your mouth. But there is basically, if you're working in public spaces where people are, it's probably best to keep toxic plants out. And auditory, you know, bamboos are really, really vocal plants, which is what I like about them. That's one of the things I like about them. And they don't just make one sound, they make a whole bunch of sounds. Plants in general make a lot of sounds, but bamboos are particularly vocal. And so utilizing this element and then highlighting it within the gardens for therapy is really it's important. And I think one thing that's really interesting is since COVID, I have had so many people, probably about 50% of the people that I plant for are asking me for a certain sound. That never happened before COVID. People, and granted, I have a lot of people who have come down here from up north and things like that, but I mean, I maybe could have counted on one hand in 25 years how many people asked me about sound and bamboo. And now it's 50% of the time, if not more. So sound is becoming very much something that is coming to the fore. And I don't even think that it's always conscious, but we are getting so bombarded with so much sound and noise pollution all the time that people just want to hear that sound. And so one of the things, graceful bamboo is a good one for an example, is that swishing sound of bamboo, it sounds a lot like water. So you can create the element of feeling like you're around running water by having bamboos. And then just like, this is my friend Gerard's piece. That was at Tropical Bamboo. I think it's down now. But like, incredible things that you can do with natural materials to have as a wonder piece that people can see within that. Wow factors. So, smell, we talked about this. One of the things about the smell of bamboo, and this goes back to forest bathing, is that we can get phytonutrients not only from taking them into our body by the foods that we eat and the medicines that we use, we can also get phytonutrients through our skin. And so part of forest bathing isn't just about being in the forest, it's also about these phytochemicals that are raining down, literally, and going and absorbing through our skin and into our system. And these are things that are changing the way we feel. They influence our hormones, our thinking, our thoughts, our immune system. All of these things are impacted by spending time around plants. And so one of the things that bamboo, usually what I do is if I'm at a big event or something, I usually ask people, I said, so how does the bamboo make you feel? And like, I feel calm, relaxed, kind of just really kind of chill. I was like, yeah, you just described myrcene. Myrcene is the #1 terpene that's coming out of bamboo. And so it literally makes you feel that because you are absorbing it through your skin as you walk through the bamboos. So one of the things that we talk about therapeutic gardens is they're coming at you from all of your senses and physically altering you through this process. Another great example is geosmin. Geosmin is like something that humans are highly attuned to. It's wet soil. And we think that, or there's thought process that we have such a sensitivity to it is because it helped us track water. But it's an antioxidant and a terpene, and it comes through touching the soil. Well, in this time frame that we're in now, I'm talking to more and more 20-year-olds that have never taken their shoes off and put their feet on the ground. They have never planted a plant. You have, good job. There's a lot of kids that haven't because they walk up to they get out of the car, they open the door, they walk on the concrete, they go in the house, they take their shoes off, they put their shoes back on, they walk back out, and they get in the car. That's it. That's the whole gig, right? So touching soil is really, really important. And not just for like the things that you're absorbing, just for hand structure and the dexterity and muscles that are in your hands. So there's a lot of different elements to touching things. And the terpenes come in a lot of different forms. Myrcene is just one of them. An example is pine trees. Pine trees have pinene. So that's like, it's kind of an uplifting, aromatic. When you think about pine, like you think about Christmas, and it's light and lemony, and that's what pinene is. So all these different plants have different terpenes. These terpenes are going, monoterpenes, sesquiterpenes, regular terpenes. These are all terpenes, and terpenes go into your system, and they alter you. So that's how plants are interfacing with us. And for plants, they're part of they do a couple of different things. They're part of their defense mechanisms. They're also part of how they communicate with each other. So they have a whole thing that they're doing with them. Sound healing, we talked about a little bit about this. My favorites in those, graceful and dwarf graceful, sea breeze, those are really swishy ones. Anything that has a lot of leaves is kind of swishy, and it makes that sound like water. And then we have the creaking ones. Creaking ones are like a bamboo that's more of a timber bamboo, but they're usually, the creaking comes from them going next to each other and moving, and that's where you hear that creaking. So dragon's nest, kimii, ventricosa, these are ones that are kind of dense, bigger, and you get underneath of them and like it's fun. It's fun. Not for everybody, but it is fun for me. Geosmin, we talked about that. So boost certain chemicals like serotonin, norepinephrine in your brain, which act like antidepressants. So, and that's just from touching soil. That's just from getting your hands in the dirt, right? These are three ways that are free that really impact the health of a person when spending time in the garden. One is putting your hands in the dirt. That gets you geosmin. We already talked about that. Two is vitamin D. Vitamin D that's made from sunlight is water soluble and accessible to your body. You need about 22% of uncovered skin for about 15 to 20 minutes to get the amount of sunlight that you need. Here in Florida, we should all not be vitamin D deficient, and yet people are. Part of it is like, you have to remember, because I do this too, is that we cover up all our skin. So just taking time to uncover that skin and making vitamin D. Vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. And hormones all play within each other, and they have everything to do with how you feel. So if you want to feel better, get some more sunlight, just a little bit. The third one is grounding. And if you haven't heard of grounding, probably everybody has. It helps with a wide range of things. It essentially connects you back to the earth by having your hands or feet or body on the earth itself. And the resonance of the earth and you start to sync. And that's the basics for grounding. Grounding is associated with feeling uplifted, to feeling calm, to a lot of mental illness, but also like physical too. So all of these things are both mental and physical together. Touch. I like bamboos for touch. I touch them all the time. Not all of them are worthy of the general public touching, though. And so when we want to talk about bamboos that are good for touching, again, dwarf graceful vulgaris is another one. That's one that we see a lot around here. That's ones that have really smooth, they're almost like soft, but they're smooth. And those are good to interface, because to me, when you start to talk about plants, like, we want to touch them. Kids want to touch them. Everybody should want to touch them. I want to touch them, but we want to touch them. And some of the bamboos do have these little hairs on them that can get stuck in you. So it's important to have the ones that are in spaces that people are interacting with that are good for touching. Asian lemon is another one, and actually waman. Visual stimulus, so colors. In bamboos, we have blues, we have blacks, yellows. These are things that really pop, and I think when you see a plant, this is what you usually describe as like Buddha belly. When you see a plant like Buddha belly, it's like one of those wow tropical plants, because I didn't know bamboo could do that. Like, and then it becomes like, well, if you didn't know bamboo could do that, what else don't you know, right? So these are always conversation starters, and a lot about ecotherapy is using gardens and plants to start conversations that you might not always have. And so that kind of leads down another pathway. Cool bamboo is the cold, hardy version of Buddha, by the way. And then size, we've got Old Hamai, Beachiana. These are all, I'm only mentioning here, these are all clumping, cold, hardy bamboos, because that's where we are. Of course, in other places, there are still bamboos that you can use. They would just be different ones. And then taste, utilizing bamboos for taste. We have tea, we have shoots, you can cook in bamboo, you can do a lot of things around eating bamboo. And so I always think that and this is becoming more and more, is that when you can give people something that either smells interesting, or they can taste, or they can do something and use more than one sense at a time in a garden, it's more impactful. The more senses you can use, the more impactful it will be. And then doing things. The other thing is like doing events where you bring people in to actually do something that's unusual. There's a lot of people maybe who have seen, cooking in bamboo on YouTube, but they never thought about doing it, So doing something that's a wow factor with people and bringing them to your space and incorporating things that people wouldn't have thought of. Most people don't think about eating bamboo shoots. In fact, most people have eaten bamboo shoots in a Chinese food restaurant, but they didn't know it was bamboo. They just thought it was called bamboo. So use the things that you plant. And then my favorite way is with art. I love immersive experiences. I think being in the garden is an immersive experience, but I really love to work with natural materials and get people to do things with them, because as adults, we forget how to play. And I think the further down this adulting we go, the further we forget how to play. And incorporating play back into something is really important. The other thing that I really come across a lot in these situations is I have a lot of people come up and go, what am I supposed to do? And they want a list of like, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And it is not anybody's fault to come to a situation and ask those kind of questions, because this is exactly what we've trained you 12 years in school to do, is to sit down, don't speak until spoken to, don't ask any questions, and do exactly what you're told to do. I want everybody to do exactly opposite of that, please. Ask a lot of questions. Think outside the box. Do everything differently, right? We need people, I was listening to a parenting person the other day, and they were talking about like the expectation we have for 5-year-olds is to sit down, be quiet, and not speak. If we had a 25-year-old that was doing that, we would say they have a mental issue, right? So why do we expect 5-year-olds to turn into a 25-year-old who doesn't sit down and do what they're told? We need to retrain, and we need to really focus on how we're training our kids and what we're training them to do. So what I like about this is that I usually give, when people come to me and they are challenged in this way, that the gentle way to do it is to try and find a path for them to get to a space that maybe you're going to kind of lead them to, and to also show them examples. Typically in these kind of situations, I have several other people who are usually working at the same time, and that really helps. Believe it or not, parallel play that starts when kids are little, we still do as adults, right? We're kind of looking over and going, well, what are they doing over there? So that really helps a lot. And setting out, this is a really simple thing to do. It's a really easy, basic way to use bamboo, and it's super incredibly powerful. So you can do things, I call this bamboo Jenga. And it's also like, I think you could do a whole study on how people interface with this, because my friend Gerard is very much a builder, so he always wants to stack everything. How tall can we get it? But we can do bee houses. We can do all sorts of different things. These are two examples that were I run a bamboo art contest every year, so I'm going to plug that. And these were some examples that people made out of bamboo that were winners this year. And then utilizing bamboo, I think one of the things about looking at bamboo, and okay, my thing is bamboo, but maybe your thing is something else, right? And that's fine. It's the idea of looking at something and seeing something different, right? What else can we do with it? How else can we utilize it? How else can we make this an accessibility to people, right? For me, I'm obsessed with these little circle things, which is why I had you all pick one. So I am obsessed with those. This is a concrete countertop that was made with bamboos from Avery Island, where I'm going tomorrow, which is the home of the Tabasco Corporation, cut and inserted into it. It's absolutely gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So like, what else can you do with these things? This woman here, Margherita Bertoli, she's out of Italy. She is phenomenal, and she does stuff with bamboo that's amazing. She also uses Arundo. Arundo Donax is considered also an invasive. And by the way, I'm going to say something really controversial now. If you feel, and I'm not maybe talking about the room, maybe I'm talking to the people out there, if you feel like you are a person who has zero resources in your life, and maybe you do, go to the invasive species list and pick a plant. I don't care which one, any of them, because most of them are edible and all of them are usable. And you now have access to thousands of acres because people want to get rid of it. And that's true for a lot of different things. There's a woman in Kentucky who builds her entire livelihood is built around using kudzu because it's edible, it's medicinal, and it's a forage. And you can also use it to create things. These are some more interactive experiences. There is no age limit on using and working with these things. So this is crossing the right and left brain and moving them together. You're actually touching a natural material, which is very rare, even in our lives, to touch natural materials. I talk about this to some people, and I don't think it really gets across as much, but we spend most of our time touching something that is basically the equivalent of eating at McDonald's. We're either touching plastic, we're touching drywall or paint or some chemical. These are all the things that we surround ourselves in. and to actually how much time, and that's for us, how much time are we actually spending touching something that's a raw material? It's very, very little. And so there is something magical that happens when people touch raw materials and spend their hands. There was a guy who came to my booth one time, and he was from Japan, and he says, you know, the village north of me was known for working with bamboo. That's what they did. They wove with bamboo. And he says they were also known to never get sick. So I recently was, because I spread these things around, you just have to, like, I get a little obsessive about this. So just, sorry in advance. But I had the school that I work with, they have bins of these things everywhere, of these cut up pieces. Recently, I got a series of texts from the principal of the school, and they had a nonverbal autistic 8th grader. He's at the level where he has a shadow who works with them, and he basically just is on his computer all the time. And because they have these bins out, they're just sitting around of the places, and they were doing they have me come in sometimes to do bamboo design and things like that that they incorporate into their learning. So we were designing a chicken coop, and he was in the classroom, and he started to pick up the bamboo pieces, and he started to use them and to just feel them and touch them. And both the principal and his shadow looked at each other because he had never done this before. And from there, he did that for about a half an hour, which was unheard of. From there, they went outside, and they were walking through the bamboo, because there what we do is we try and utilize, like, how you grow something all the way to, like, utilization of it. And he asked his first question that he had ever asked in 2 years of being at that school about the bamboo. And so I don't know what that is, but to me it was like, it's incredibly magical and powerful. You know, if this can get through to even a small amount of people, how important it is to have natural materials and to touch them and to have them in our lives and to use them creatively, that's my only goal. So, upcoming events that I wanted to talk about. Basically, at the end of this, what I wanted to do was to do a little moment where we sit with the things. So I'll do this, and then we'll finish with this. We have a bamboo biochar class on February 10th. We have a bamboo workshop the 15th to the 17th, and another bamboo workshop that'll be much more traditional here than what we did tonight. These are ways that you can learn more about bamboo that I'm doing. And then I also have lots of social media and things like that. So I'm part of 3 different nonprofits. One is the Florida Permaculture Convergence, one is the American Bamboo Society, and one is the Bamboo Art Contest. And so any of those ways you can get a hold of me. Mostly my 2 sites are This Bamboo Life and Bamboo Leaf Tea. And so that's the business side of it. What I wanted to do was talk about the pieces that are in your hand. And so I wanted to just do a moment where you take the pieces and you spend some time feeling the softness or the roughness. You can look at it, see if it has different colors. You can maybe see the little tubes that make up the tube. See if you feel any sort of different temperature. Does it have a temperature? Does it feel like your temperature as you hold it? Does it have a softness or a roughness? Does it have a sharp edge? And to really sit with that piece, one of the things that I like to do with bamboo is that it can be a reminder, and that you can have these pieces that you take with you, and maybe you have it in the car when you're sitting in traffic, or maybe you have it in your home next to your computer when you're working or on your workspace, but you have natural materials. It can be bamboo, it can be something else. And these natural pieces stay with you as a reminder of what it feels like when you're in your sit space, when you're in that space that you find magic, and you find your center, and you find your heart, and you find who you are, who you really are. Because we all do these tangents of like, we're over here, we're over there. But who you really are when you're in your best zone. And so finding these pieces and taking these pieces with you. Sometimes I keep them in my pocket if they're a rock or a leaf or a piece of something that I found that I just find interesting, or a flower. And to take these pieces with you and to hold them to help you remember when you're out and it's not so easy to be who you are, to help you remember who you really are and who you really want to share with the whole world. Thank you.